In the small, picturesque town of Maplewood, life was generally peaceful. The streets were lined with cherry blossom trees, and families often gathered for community picnics in the local park. Among the residents were Richard and Sarah, a couple whose love story began in high school. Their marriage, though seemingly perfect on the surface, faced struggles that neither of them could have anticipated. Richard, a successful business consultant, worked long hours to provide for Sarah and their comfortable lifestyle. He was ambitious and driven, but this dedication often left little time for his wife. Sarah, a devoted elementary school teacher, poured her heart into her students, but at home, she felt increasingly lonely. The spark that once lit their relationship began to dim as Richard became more consumed by his work. As the months passed, the distance between them grew. Richard's late nights became more frequent, and Sarah could sense that something was amiss. Unknown to her, Richard was entangled in a passionate affair with Emily, the teenage daughter of a distant relative. Their romance ignited at a family reunion, where they found a connection that filled a void in Richard's life. Emily was young, vibrant, and full of life. She exuded a charm that drew Richard in, and their meetings became the highlight of his week. However, the thrill of their secret relationship began to turn into a weight of guilt. Richard loved Emily, but felt trapped in a web of lies. Meanwhile, Emily wanted more than just secret rendezvous. She craved a future with Richard and was growing increasingly impatient. As the affair deepened, tensions rose between the three of them. Emily's threats to expose their relationship hung like a dark cloud over Richard, and Sarah's suspicions were beginning to boil over. A tragic confrontation seemed inevitable. The affair begins. The affair started innocently enough during a summer family gathering. Richard and Emily found themselves seated next to each other at a picnic table, sharing laughter and stories that made the hours slip away. The chemistry was undeniable, a magnetic pull that drew them closer with each passing moment. After that day, they began to text. Their conversations were flirtatious at first, filled with inside jokes and playful banter. But soon, those texts turned into late-night calls, and their meetings turned into secret escapes. One sultry evening, they met in a secluded park away from prying eyes. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the trees. As they sat on a bench, Emily turned to Richard, her expression a mix of frustration and longing. "You need to tell Sarah about us," she said, her voice firm. "I can't keep living like this. It's not fair to either of us." Richard felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He loved Emily, but he couldn't imagine throwing away everything he had built with Sarah. "I can't just throw everything away," he replied, his voice shaky. "It would ruin my life, and yours too. We need to be patient." Emily's eyes narrowed, determination etched on her face. "If you don't tell her, I will. I won't be your secret anymore," she threatened, her tone unwavering. The fear of losing both women gripped Richard tightly. He didn't know what to say. Cracks in the marriage. Weeks turned into months, and the tension between Richard and Emily grew unbearable. Their once thrilling meetings became fraught with anxiety. Each encounter felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode. Sarah, meanwhile, had noticed the change in Richard. His late nights at work seemed more frequent, and his phone was always close by, guarded as if it contained secrets. One evening, Sarah found Richard staring at his phone, his expression a mix of guilt and joy. "Who are you texting that has you smiling like that?" she asked, attempting to keep her tone light. Richard quickly hid his phone, a flicker of panic crossing his face. "Just work stuff," he replied, avoiding her gaze. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. "You know you can talk to me, right?" Richard nodded, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. As Sarah went to bed that night, doubts swirled in her mind, mixing with the growing unease about her husband's behavior. A suspicious discovery. One day, while cleaning their bedroom, Sarah stumbled upon a receipt for an upscale restaurant that Richard had never taken her to. The sight of it sent a chill down her spine. She turned it over, her heart racing, searching for more clues. That evening, she confronted Richard, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. "What's going on, Richard? Why have you been acting so strange?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Richard's heart raced. He had been preparing for this moment, but the words wouldn't come. I can explain," he stammered, his palms sweating. "Explain what?" Sarah's eyes filled with hurt. "That you've been lying to me, that you've been sneaking around behind my back." The argument escalated quickly, both voices rising in anger. Richard tried to defend himself, but Sarah's hurt turned into fury. "If you don't come clean, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've been doing," she warned, her voice low and fierce. Richard felt a wave of panic wash over him. The ultimatum. Richard stood in Emily's dimly lit apartment, the air thick with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. The space, once a refuge filled with laughter and shared dreams, now felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on him. A clock ticked ominously in the background, each second stretching into an eternity, amplifying the tension between them. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his hands clammy and his heart racing. "I can't do this anymore, Emily," he said, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a heavy burden. "We have to end this." Emily's face twisted from hurt to anger in the blink of an eye, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "You think you can just walk away from me? After everything we've shared, I won't let you go that easily." Her voice, once soft and inviting, now felt like a whip cracking through the stillness of the room. Richard's pulse quickened. He had never seen this fierce side of her before. The passion that had once drawn him in now felt like a storm brewing, ready to unleash chaos. "I care about you," he replied softly, his voice tinged with desperation. "But I can't ruin my marriage. I love Sarah, despite everything." He thought about their life together, the home they had built, filled with warmth and laughter. Each memory felt like a ghost haunting him, reminding him of the family he could lose. Emily's expression darkened, fury bubbling beneath the surface. "So you're choosing her over me? After all the promises you made to me?" The bitterness in her voice cut through him. "I gave you my heart, Richard. You can't just throw me away." The anguish in her words echoed in his mind, stirring a tumult of emotions. Richard felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. "Emily, please, let's talk about this. You're being unreasonable." He took a step back, trying to create some physical distance between them, but it only fueled her anger further. "No, you can't abandon me. I won't let you," Emily shouted, her voice rising, shaking the very foundation of their relationship. Richard could see the storm in her eyes, the desperation morphing into something darker and more dangerous. The breaking point. That night, Richard lay in bed, unable to sleep. The darkness felt oppressive, pressing down on him as he replayed the events of the day in his mind. Each replay brought a new wave of regret and disbelief. "We need to talk. It's over," he had texted Emily, hoping for closure, but instead, he felt like he had opened a Pandora's box, unleashing chaos that he could not contain. The next day, they met at their usual spot in the park, a place that had once brimmed with laughter and warmth. Now, it felt like a battlefield, the air thick with unresolved tension. The sun shone brightly, but Richard felt only a chill creeping into his bones as he approached Emily. She was already there, her expression a tumultuous mix of hurt and rage. "You can't just end this," she cried, stepping closer, her voice trembling with desperation. "I love you! You're everything to me!" Her words pierced him, and he felt a rush of guilt wash over him, making him question everything he had thought he wanted. "I can't lose everything I have," he replied, his heart heavy with conflict. "I have a family, Emily, a wife who loves me." He thought of Sarah and their son, the family dinners filled with laughter and warmth, the way Sarah looked at him with trust and love. Every moment felt like a reminder of the life he had almost sacrificed for a fleeting passion. Emily's face twisted in disbelief, her anger boiling over. "You think I don't know about your family? You think I wanted to come between you two? I thought we had something real." The desperation in her voice broke Richard's heart, but he had to stand firm. He had to protect what remained of his life. "Emily, it's not just about us anymore. I'm not the only one affected by this. There are consequences." He tried to reach out to her, to show her that he understood her pain, but she stepped back, shaking her head as if trying to shake off a nightmare. "Then what do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice rising again. "You want me to just forget you? To pretend this never happened?" The intensity of her emotions threatened to engulf him, and Richard felt trapped in a web of choices and regrets. "Emily, please, calm down," he shouted, desperation bleeding into his voice. But as he spoke, she lunged forward again, the tension in the air becoming palpable. He felt a wave of terror wash over him as he realized he was losing control of the situation. "Put that down!" he yelled, but it was too late. The world around him blurred as the sharp object struck him again, and he fell to the ground, gasping for breath. In those final moments, as darkness began to encroach, he couldn't help but think of Sarah and their son, the joy they had shared, and how he had allowed it all to slip through his fingers. The murder. Richard lay on the grass, pain exploding through his body, an unbearable pressure in his chest. "Why did you make me do this?" Emily screamed, her face contorted in horror as she watched him collapse. The realization of her actions began to sink in, and for the first time, Richard saw the fear in her eyes. Fear of the consequences, fear of losing him forever. "Emily." "Why?" he gasped, struggling to speak, his breaths shallow and ragged. The world felt distant, as if he were floating away from reality. His mind raced with regret and disbelief. He had made choices, but he never imagined they would lead to this. As he lay there, gasping for air, Emily's face shifted from shock to sheer panic. She dropped the object, her hands trembling, and stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. "What have I done?" she whispered, backing away as if trying to escape her own actions. The weight of her guilt hung in the air, suffocating both of them. Richard struggled to focus, fighting against the darkness closing in on him. Every moment felt like an eternity as he realized this was not how his life was supposed to end. He had made choices, but he never imagined they would lead to this. Each heartbeat echoed like a reminder of the love he had taken for granted. As he slipped into unconsciousness, he heard sirens in the distance, but they felt like a world away. In those final moments, he thought of Sarah and their son, the life they had built, and the devastating impact his choices would have on their lives. The thought crushed him, and just like that, everything went dark. The investigation begins. The next morning, news of Richard's murder spread like wildfire through Maplewood. The small town, usually peaceful and quiet, was rocked by the tragedy. Detective Jameson arrived at the scene, surveying the chaos unfolding before him. Neighbors gathered, their faces twisted in shock, whispering about what had happened, struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. Jameson took a deep breath, steeling himself for the difficult task ahead. He approached Sarah, who was sitting on her porch, tears streaming down her face, her expression a mixture of disbelief and grief. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said gently, trying to provide comfort while gathering information. "I don't understand. Richard was a good man," she cried, her voice breaking as she looked up at him. "We had problems, but I never wanted this. I just wanted him to be honest with me." Her words were filled with sorrow, and Jameson felt a pang of sympathy for her. He could see the turmoil in her eyes, the pain of betrayal mixing with the grief of loss. As he spoke with friends and family, he learned about Richard's secret affair with Emily. Everyone seemed shocked, but also whispered of how things hadn't been right for a while. He was always distracted, always on his phone, a neighbor said, shaking their head in disbelief. We all thought he was just busy with work, but I guess there was more to it. Jameson noted the tension in Sarah's voice, sensing that she was hiding something beneath the surface. He continued to dig deeper, determined to uncover the truth behind Richard's tragic death. He interviewed more people, piecing together the last few days of Richard's life, and soon discovered the extent of his secretive behavior. One of Richard's co-workers revealed he was talking about making some big changes. I thought he was going to leave Sarah, but he seemed torn. I had no idea it would end like this. The co-worker's words rang in Jameson's ears as he began to connect the dots, understanding the emotional turmoil Richard faced. The detective's instincts kicked in as he pieced together the timeline leading up to Richard's murder. He began to wonder if Emily was truly capable of such a violent act. As he continued his investigation, he discovered the extent of the turmoil that had been brewing beneath the surface of Richard's life. The deeper he dug, the more complex the situation became. A torn fabric days passed, and Jameson remained focused on solving the case, determined to uncover the truth. While searching the area near where Richard was found, he spotted something unusual. A piece of bright red fabric was caught on a branch, fluttering in the breeze like a distress signal. Recognition struck him. It matched a dress Emily had worn before. With careful hands, he collected the fabric, feeling a surge of hope. This could be a vital piece of evidence. He felt the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he imagined the implications. If this fabric belonged to Emily, it could confirm her presence at the scene of the crime. As he analyzed the fabric, he found a small, dark stain, perhaps blood. This discovery sent a thrill of urgency coursing through him. Jameson knew he needed to confront Emily and gather her side of the story. The next day, he arranged to meet her at the local cafe, a place bustling with activity. The scent of coffee and pastries filled the air, but Jameson felt a growing tension in his chest as he approached her. Emily sat at a corner table, her hands wrapped tightly around a steaming mug, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Emily," he said, taking a seat across from her, "I need to ask you some questions about Richard." Her head snapped up, and for a moment, the vulnerability in her eyes flickered with defiance. "What do you want to know?" she replied, her voice cold and guarded. Jameson leaned in, choosing his words carefully. "I found something near the scene, a piece of fabric that looks like it could belong to you. Can you explain how it got there?" He watched her closely, searching for any sign of guilt or fear. Emily's face paled, and her hands trembled around her cup. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her gaze darting away. "I was at home that night. I wouldn't hurt Richard." "Emily, I want to believe you, but the evidence suggests otherwise." He pushed the fabric across the table, watching her reaction. "This is serious. You need to be honest with me." The color drained from her face as she stared at the fabric, her expression shifting from confusion to realization. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I loved him," she cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But he was going to leave me. I couldn't lose him." Jameson felt a chill run down his spine as her words sank in. "What do you mean? He was going to leave you. Did you confront him?" "Yes," she shouted, her voice breaking. "I couldn't stand the thought of losing him. I thought we had something special, and I thought he would choose me." The detective leaned back, trying to process her confession. Emily was unraveling before him, the weight of her emotions spilling out like a dam breaking. "Emily, you need to tell me everything that happened that night," he urged, hoping to gain clarity amidst the chaos. "I confronted him in the park," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I thought he would change his mind. I never meant to hurt him. I just wanted him to understand how much I loved him." Jameson took a deep breath, realizing the depth of her despair. "But you did hurt him, Emily. This is going to change everything." Her eyes widened with fear, and Jameson felt a pang of sympathy mixed with the necessity of justice. The truth was a heavy burden, and in that moment, he understood the complexity of love, betrayal, and the lengths people would go to protect their hearts. As the weight of her confession settled between them, Jameson knew they were just beginning to scratch the surface of a tragedy that would ripple through the lives of everyone involved. The aftermath. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, both for Emily and for Sarah, who had been thrust into a nightmare she never saw coming. News of Richard's murder reverberated through Maplewood, each headline a reminder of the life they had lost. Sarah found herself navigating a fog of grief, anger, and betrayal as the community rallied around her, offering condolences that felt hollow. "Why did you have to do this, Richard?" she whispered to herself in the quiet of her home, clutching a framed photo of their family. The picture captured a moment of happiness, a birthday party for their son, the three of them smiling and carefree. Now it felt like a cruel reminder of what could have been. Detective Jameson worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of the case while grappling with his own feelings of empathy for both women involved. As he sifted through the evidence, he couldn't shake the image of Sarah's broken expression. He had seen too many families torn apart by tragedy, but this felt different, more personal, more profound. He visited Richard's workplace, where the atmosphere was somber. Co-workers exchanged hushed whispers, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. "He was such a good guy," one colleague remarked, eyes downcast. "I can't believe he's gone." Jameson knew he had to dig deeper. He began interviewing people who had seen Richard and Emily together, trying to determine the timeline of their relationship. The more he learned, the more complex the story became. Richard had been living a double life, caught between his commitment to his family and his passion for Emily. Meanwhile, Emily was spiraling. With the weight of her actions pressing down on her, she felt trapped in a whirlwind of guilt and despair. She reached out to Richard's family, hoping to find some semblance of forgiveness, but their grief was palpable. "How could you do this to him?" Richard's sister cried, her voice a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You took him from us!" Emily's heart shattered at their words. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I loved him," she sobbed, her voice echoing in the empty room. But her pleas fell on deaf ears, and she realized she had lost everything: Richard, his love, and the life they could have shared. As the investigation progressed, the community's response shifted. Initially sympathetic to Sarah, whispers of betrayal and infidelity began to circulate, casting a shadow over her grief. "She must have known," some whispered. "How could she not?" Sarah, feeling the weight of judgment, withdrew from the world. The once bustling household felt desolate, filled only with echoes of laughter that no longer existed. Her son, unaware of the complexities of adult relationships, would ask about his father with innocent curiosity, each question stabbing at her heart. "When will Daddy come home, Mommy?" His innocent queries twisted the knife deeper, leaving Sarah grappling with a blend of anger, grief, and confusion. "I don't know, sweetheart," she would reply, her voice breaking. "I just don't know." Days turned into weeks, and as the trial approached, the community braced itself for the fallout. Emily was charged with second-degree murder, and the courtroom filled with a mix of curiosity and outrage. The day of the trial, Sarah sat in the front row, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She wanted answers, but she also felt a deep sense of betrayal. As the prosecution laid out its case, detailing the events leading up to Richard's death, Sarah felt her world shattering anew. Each piece of evidence felt like a stab to her heart, and she struggled to reconcile the man she loved with the person who had betrayed her. Emily took the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted the fateful night. "I never meant for it to happen," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I loved him. I thought we had a future together. When he said he was going to leave me, I panicked. I didn't want to lose him." Jameson watched closely, noting the mix of sorrow and anger on Sarah's face. He could see the internal battle raging within her as she processed Emily's words. "Did you ever think about what Richard's death would mean for his family?" the prosecutor asked, her voice firm. "Did you consider the consequences of your actions?" Emily's voice wavered as she struggled to respond. "I didn't think, I just reacted. I loved him." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of her confession hanging in the air. Jameson could feel the tension, the heartbreak, the anger. As he listened to Emily's testimony, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of empathy for both women, each trapped in their own turmoil. The reckoning. As the trial progressed, the tension in the courtroom became almost unbearable. Jameson sat in the back, observing the unfolding drama, his heart heavy with the emotional toll it was taking on everyone involved. Sarah, once filled with hope and love, now looked like a shadow of her former self. The weight of betrayal and grief seemed to seep into her very bones, making her visibly fragile. Each day brought new revelations, tearing at the fabric of Richard's life and the relationships he had built. Sarah had been left to pick up the pieces, grappling with the reality that the man she loved had been leading a double life. With every testimony, every piece of evidence presented, she felt the ground beneath her feet shifting. Emily, on the stand, shared her version of events with a mix of defiance and desperation. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she insisted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought I was fighting for love." The jury listened intently, their expressions a mixture of sympathy and skepticism. As the defense and prosecution argued their cases, Jameson felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He had seen the aftermath of many tragic situations, but this felt uniquely personal. He had watched two lives, Sarah's and Emily's, tangle in a way that left them both irreparably broken. After days of intense testimony, the jury finally deliberated. Sarah sat in the courtroom, her heart racing. The moment felt surreal, as if time had slowed down to a crawl. She glanced at Emily, who sat across the aisle, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and defiance. Sarah's emotions were a whirlwind of rage and sorrow, and she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. Finally, the jury returned. The foreman stood, his face solemn. "We find the defendant, Emily Turner, guilty of manslaughter." A gasp rippled through the courtroom, and Sarah felt her heart plunge into the depths of despair. As Emily was led away in handcuffs, she turned to Sarah, her expression a mix of regret and pleading. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Sarah felt the tears spill down her cheeks as she met Emily's gaze. "You took him from me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you." In that moment, the reality of their shared tragedy settled in, a stark reminder of the love that had been lost and the lives that would never be the same again. Healing months passed after the trial, and the small town of Maplewood struggled to heal from the tragedy that had unfolded. Sarah found herself navigating a new reality, one filled with loss, uncertainty, and the daunting task of rebuilding her life without Richard. Every corner of her home was a reminder of the man she had loved, and the grief felt like an unrelenting wave that crashed over her time and time again. Determined not to let despair consume her, Sarah sought help. She joined a support group for people dealing with loss, where she found solace in the shared experiences of others. In those meetings, she began to understand the complexities of grief, the way it ebbed and flowed like the tide. Each person's story was different, but the pain was a familiar thread that connected them all. One day, during a particularly emotional session, Sarah met a woman named Lisa. Lisa had also lost someone she loved, and the bond they formed felt instant. They began meeting outside the support group, sharing their struggles over coffee and long walks in the park. As their friendship blossomed, Sarah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't thought possible. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive Richard for what he did," Sarah admitted one afternoon, her voice trembling. "It feels like he took everything from me." Lisa nodded, her expression empathetic. "It's okay to feel that way. Grief is messy, and healing takes time. You don't have to rush into forgiveness." With Lisa's support, Sarah began to rebuild her life. She enrolled in a local art class, rediscovering her love for painting. As she poured her emotions onto the canvas, she felt a sense of release. The colors blended together in chaotic harmony, mirroring the storm within her. Each stroke became a way to express her pain, her anger, and ultimately, her journey toward healing. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her cell, grappling with the reality of her actions. The walls felt suffocating, and the loneliness weighed heavily on her soul. Each day was a reminder of the life she had taken and the love she had lost. In her moments of solitude, she found herself reflecting on the choices that had led her to this point. One night, she picked up a pen and began to write a letter to Sarah, pouring out her heart onto the pages. "I am so deeply sorry for the pain I caused you," she wrote, tears staining the paper. "I never wanted it to end this way. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." As the letter slipped through the bars of her cell, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. She knew forgiveness might be a distant dream, but she needed Sarah to understand the remorse she felt. The unexpected connection. As Sarah continued her journey of healing, she received a letter that caught her completely off guard. It was from Emily, the woman whose actions had shattered her life. The moment she opened the envelope, her heart raced with a mix of anxiety and curiosity. She had spent countless nights dreaming of confrontation, of shouting her pain at Emily, but now faced with the reality of a letter, she felt a wave of uncertainty. She read Emily's words slowly, feeling the weight of each sentence. "I am so deeply sorry for the pain I caused you. I never wanted it to end this way. I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." Each line was heavy with regret, and Sarah found herself torn between anger and empathy. In the days that followed, Sarah couldn't shake the letter from her mind. It felt surreal to hear Emily's remorse so directly, yet she was still grappling with the betrayal that had led to Richard's death. Why now? She wondered, wrestling with the complex emotions swirling within her. Determined to find closure, Sarah wrote a response. "I'm not sure I can forgive you, but I want to understand. Can we meet?" As she sealed the envelope, she felt a flicker of hope, a chance to confront the woman who had irrevocably altered her life. Weeks later, they met in a small, neutral space arranged by the prison. As Sarah entered the room, she felt a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Emily sat across the table, her eyes filled with a mix of vulnerability and guilt. "Thank you for coming," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." "I know," Sarah replied, her heart pounding. "But understanding doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't bring Richard back." Tears filled Emily's eyes. "I can't change what happened, but I want to take responsibility for my actions. I want you to know how sorry I am." As they talked, Sarah felt a complex web of emotions unraveling. She shared her grief, her anger, and the struggle of raising their son alone. Emily listened intently, her face a mask of sorrow. "I never thought it would come to this," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "I lost everything too. I loved him, but I let my emotions spiral out of control." The conversation stretched on, revealing layers of pain and regret. With each exchange, Sarah felt her heart soften just a fraction. Perhaps forgiveness was not about excusing Emily's actions, but about releasing the grip of anger that had held her captive for so long. As they spoke, Sarah began to see Emily not just as a perpetrator, but as a flawed human being who had made a tragic mistake. "I want to heal, but I'm not sure how," she admitted, her voice quivering. Emily nodded, understanding. Neither do I, but maybe we can find a way together. In that moment, an unexpected connection formed, a fragile bridge over the chasm of pain that separated them. It was a step toward healing, one that neither of them had anticipated. New beginnings. As the months turned into years, both women continued to navigate their journeys of healing. Sarah found solace in her art, using her creative expression to channel her grief into something beautiful. Each painting became a reflection of her growth, a testament to her resilience. She opened up a small art studio in Maplewood, offering classes to children and adults alike. It became a space of healing, a place where people could come together to create and connect. As she poured her heart into her work, she began to reclaim her identity beyond being Richard's widow. Meanwhile, Emily was working hard in prison, taking advantage of every opportunity for rehabilitation. She enrolled in courses focused on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution, determined to learn from her mistakes. As she wrote to Sarah, sharing her progress, a surprising friendship began to blossom. Their correspondence evolved into a genuine connection, filled with honesty and vulnerability. Emily expressed her desire to help others avoid the same mistakes she had made. "I want to share my story," she wrote in one letter. "If I can help just one person understand the importance of communication, it would mean the world to me." In her heart, Sarah began to understand that Emily's journey was one of redemption, just as her own was a path toward acceptance. She offered encouragement, sharing her own experiences in the art world, and together they found strength in their shared story of love and loss. Eventually, Emily was released on parole, and their connection became even more profound. Sarah had mixed feelings about meeting her face-to-face again, but she ultimately decided to embrace this unexpected turn in their lives. The day they met, they stood outside the prison gates, the air heavy with possibility. "I'm so grateful for this chance," Emily said, tears of relief glistening in her eyes. "Me too," Sarah replied, feeling the weight of their shared journey. "Let's move forward together, one step at a time." From that day forward, they became advocates for emotional awareness, speaking at local schools and community centers. They shared their stories, highlighting the importance of communication and understanding in relationships. As they connected with others, they found purpose in their shared mission. In the quiet moments of reflection, Sarah often thought of Richard, the love they had shared, and the lessons learned through heartache. Though the pain would always be a part of her, she felt a sense of hope emerging from the darkness. The fabric of their lives had been torn, but through vulnerability and resilience, they began to stitch it back together, creating a new tapestry woven with compassion, understanding, and an unwavering commitment to healing.